right at the beginning of the portion of Truma, the Torah says that the various materials that were needed are 13 materials, and the Torah uses the term v'yikhuli, you should take them from me. And Rashi says you should take them lishmi. You should give them without an ulterior motive, but rather we should be given lishma, for the sake of Hashem, the materials for the Mishkan. So the Midrash tells us, which I mentioned last week, that Hashem says, don't think that I owe you anything, that I'm beholding you for giving these materials, because the Bizas Hayam, the spoils of the sea that were given to you specifically for the building of the Mishkan. When you left Egypt and you left with this great wealth, that was for you. But that I allowed you, and I provided the spoils of the sea, which were even greater than the spoils they took out of Egypt, that was specifically for the Binyan HaMishkan, for the building of the Mishkan. That's explicit in the Midrash. And it quotes a pasuk. And then it continues to say that, and the Balaturim writes that when the Jews did the Chet Egel, there were 13 levels of distinction which we assumed when we left Egypt. During the time that we were exposed to the 10 plagues and various things, and we came to Sinai, we were endowed with 13 levels of distinction, spiritual distinction. When we did the Chet Egel, we forfeited all 13. The Mishkan that was given to us to be a reinstatement, now we have the Mishkan to be the medium to have the relation with Hashem, although it's not the same, it's at arm's length. Those 13 materials that are given are a reinstatement of those various levels of distinction. That's why Hashem says 13. Although you forfeited the 13, and I gave you the spoils of the sea specifically for that, and therefore there is no level of beholdenness to you, but nevertheless, that you gave those 13 materials for the location to be a kapora, to be an atonement, you will be reinstated to those 13 levels of distinction. It's the Midrash. And Hashem says, although I gave it to you, I gave you these materials, I consider it as if you did me a favor. Yeah. And then it continues, and that's what David says, Ashir Hashem ki gomal oloi. So the simple understanding in Tehillim is I give song to Hashem ki gomal oloi. What is gomal oloi? From Gemilas Chesed, because God was kind to me. That's what David is saying. Ashir Hashem ki gomal oloi. So the Midrash says no. Ashir Hashem ki gomal oloi means I give song to God that God considers what He gives me as if I did Him the favor, as if I did Him the chesed. It says, Hashem says, and that you've given me these 13 materials, although I gave it to you specifically for the building of the Mishkan, I consider it as if you did me the favor. Ki iluk gemaltem chesed li, as if you did me chesed. And that's what David says, Ashir Hashem ki gemal oloi, I give thanks to Hashem that even what He does for me, He considers as if I did it for Him. It's interesting. How do we understand it? So I said, there's this in the Mishnah, there's a Mishnah in the second parak of Pirkei Avos that says that if a person does something for the sake of the tzibur, and you do it l'shem shemayim, you do it for the sake of God, we say that schus avosam sayatam, that the schus of the avos, and the way the Maharal explains, of Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov assists to succeed in that endeavor. Omala and the Alechem Kila Asisam. It's the second chapter in Pirkei Avos. And I consider it as if you've achieved that yourself, meaning you personally don't have enough schus to succeed in this endeavor. But if you do it l'shem shemayim, you do it for the sake of God, Hashem will allow that the schus avos, should contribute to your ability to succeed. And when you do succeed, you get full credit as if it was your own schus. Although without the schus avos, you couldn't have succeeded. That's the second chapter in Pirkei Avos. How do we understand it? If you do it l'shem shemayim, although your schus wasn't sufficient to succeed in this particular endeavor, but if you do it for the sake of Hashem, Hashem says, I will allow the schus of the avos to contribute for you to succeed. And when you do succeed, you get full credit for that success, although your schus was not sufficient to achieve that level of success. Now, the Gemara tells us a number of locations. Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miYerushalayim. Everything's predestined except for Yerushalayim. Meaning, before a child is conceived, Hashem pronounces on that child every aspect of his life. The only aspect of that child's life which is not pronounced is tzaddik v'rosha, whether he's going to be a tzaddik or a rosha. How he lives his life. That's a kol b'dei shamayim chutz miYerushalayim. Everything's predestined except that aspect, because that's called bechira, it's free choice. So what is free choice? Do I do it for Hashem or don't I do it for Hashem? What's the objective of creation? What Hashem created existence? That we should be beneficiaries of what? Of His goodness. That's the objective. Hashem has nothing to gain. It's purely for ourselves. So if a person does something, l'shem shamayim, what are you doing exactly? You do it for the sake of God. That means you're bechira. That you've chosen to do it for the sake of God, not with your own ulterior motive, that's exactly how you're supposed to invest that ability to make the choice. You made the right choice. As a result, everything anyway is God-given. Why is it attributed to ourselves? It's attributed to ourselves because that's b'dei shamayim, that's bechira. The Midrash tells us when a person has a child, a male, and you circumcise him, Hashem says, you think you did me a favor? If I wouldn't have given you the child, the male child, would have you had the mitzvah of Milah? You're only able to do Milah because I gave you the child. So why are we credit doing for Milah? Although God gave us the male child because we chose to circumcise our child. So that's a kol b'dei shamayim chutz miYerushalayim. That's our contribution. So in life, everything is God-given. Our only input is how we do it. So therefore, Hashem says, although the spoils of the sea were given to you specifically to Mishkan, so I consider it as if you did me the favor. It's v'yichuli truma. Because when you take it from me, and that is your choice, to do it l'shem shamayim for the sake of God, automatically, that's exactly the objective of creation. So Hashem says, I consider as if you did me the favor. And that's true with everything. Ashur Hashem. David says, I give song to God, ki gomal loy, that whatever I do, it's as if I did him the favor. Because by doing it the way he wants me to do it, which is everything in life, the only thing we contribute is the bechira. Do we do it as a tzaddik or don't we do it as a tzaddik? Therefore, Hashem says, you've done me the favor. That's the understanding. Okay, that's last week. That's the building of the Mishkan. But the building of the Mishkan was what? The medium to be reinstated, to have the relation with Hashem. And the 13 materials correspond to the 13 levels of distinction, which we lost time at the Chet Egel, and they were reinstated due to the 13 materials which we contributed to the Mishkan, although the Bizas Hayam, the spoils were given specifically for the building of the Mishkan. But since it was V'chuli, you did it for me, which is an expression, actualization of your Bechira, therefore it's what? It's attributed to ourselves, although it's God-given. Okay, we're starting Tetzaveh. Ata Tetzaveh el Bnei Yisrael. You should command the Bnei Yisrael, V'yikhu eilecho shemen zayzoch, and they should take for you shemen zayzoch, olive oil, which is pure, kosis lamor, which is crushed for illumination, lalos netomid, to provide for a continuous light. It's interesting. In last week's parsha, when it spoke about the 13 materials, the Torah tells us, it says, Shemen Lamaor. Then it says, B'samim Shemen HaMishcha. You should have oil, Lamaor. Last week's parsha. One of the 13 materials was Shemen Lamaor, oil for illumination. So over there, the word Maor is written with the Vav deleted. If you take a look, the Vav is deleted. So the Baal HaTorah makes a point over there. Why is the Vav deleted? Because the Midrash tells us. Now the question is, why does Hashem want us to light the menorah? First of all, where was the menorah located? It was located in the covered sanctuary. Nobody actually benefited from that light. The only Kohen that was permitted even to go into the Heichel, into the covered sanctuary, was the Kohen who actually kindled the menorah. You weren't permitted to go in there. And the Kohen who actually sacrificed the incense offering. What was the value of that light? The answer is, that was light seemingly was, we have the menorah, we have the shulchan, and we have the Mizbeach Hazov. You have the golden altar there. So you'd say that light is for Hashem. So Moshe Rabbeinu had a question. Moshe says, evidently this light is not for us. It's for Hashem, it's for God. At Oru Shel Olam, you are the illumination, you're the light of the world. What do you need our light? Yeah. So Hashem answers Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't need your light. The reason why I want you to kindle the menorah is to elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world, that they should see that I need your light, that I want your light. And now the question is this. We've spoken many times, the light of the menorah, what does it represent? The menorah represents Torah Sheba'al Peh. That is the elucidation of the written law. All the Siyat Shmai for Torah Sheba'al Peh emanates from where? It emanates from the menorah, the lighting of the menorah. So if that is the case, what should have been the proper location for the menorah? Alongside the Aron. The Aron contained the luchos and the broken luchos, the second set and the first set that were broken, and the Sefer Torah. So that's the Torah Shebechsav. So what should have been the appropriate location for the menorah alongside the Aron? Where was the Aron located? In the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the location of the Shechina. But yet the Torah says when you light the menorah, you light it michutz laparochis. You light it on the other side of the curtain that separates between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. Why? Why does the Torah tell us you light it michutz laparochis? Because God is telling us something. L'orchem eini tzorich. I don't need your light. Because you would think that if you light it, the menorah would be situated next to the Aron in the location of the Shechina. Hashem needs our light. Hashem says, you know something? I don't need your light. L'orchem eini tzorich. That's the Midrash. So the reason why over there, when it says Shemen Lamaor, oil for illumination, the reason why the Vav is deleted is to communicate this point. L'orchem eini tzorich. I don't need your light. So it seems to be a little contradictory here. God is saying, I don't need your light. And when Moshe asks him, so if you're the light of the world, why are you asking to kindle the menorah? So Hashem says, to elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world, that I do need your light. So what are we trying? To pull the wool over the eyes of the nations of the world? If God really does need our light, so in what way is the kindling the menorah, how does it elevate us in the eyes of the world? That's the question I asked. And that's what we speak about now. This is the oil. The oil that you kindle that menorah has to be pure and kosses lamor. It has to be crushed specifically for illumination, to provide this ner tamid, this ongoing continuous light. Right. Now, the Ramchal writes that, and the Rav Chaim Volozhin explains this, even idolaters who worship deities, what did they believe? They believed, many of them, that God created the world. And after God created the world, he created systems And God himself is bound to those systems, and he cannot override those systems. So if you have a zodiac, and the zodiac indicates certain things, that means those are reflective of the systems, and God is actually locked into those systems. He gives an example: if a craftsman, a tool maker, creates a weapon, and now a person takes possession of that weapon. That person could take the life of the tool maker who made that weapon. God created a system. Once you make that system, you cannot override that system. You're locked into that system. What Paro and all the idolaters, the pagans, didn't understand, God is the basis for the system. There's no system outside of God. There's no concept of Machadish Tuva Choyim Tamas Gracious. Every aspect of existence, that's the concept of Yichud Hashem, the unity of God, Echad, everything emanates from him. So even the system is his system. So when he chooses to override the system, he overrides it. We're unworthy, but he feels, for whatever reason, he wants to provide chesed. He provides the chesed. He overrides the system. So meaning like this, you are the light of the world. Meaning, so God says, I don't need your light. I don't need your light. Even though the Torah says that the Torah, when we study Torah, that maintains the ongoing existence, but for whatever God should choose, despite that even without the Torah, he wills existence continues. However, under normal circumstances, whose behavior determines the state of existence? It's the Jewish behavior. If a non-Jewish nation, whatever they do, it does not affect the world on a global level. It's only their personal status or relation with God. Do they deserve to continue? Don't they deserve? When the Jew sins, this is Bereshis Bara Elokim. All existence is determined whether it rises or falls. That's based on the Jew's behavior. That's what he says. I don't need your light. I'm not bound to your behavior. But factually, on the normal level, the world is determined by the Jews' behavior. That's to elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world. That the Jews, being the chosen people, the world is created for them. So if they behave, the world rises. If they misbehave, the world falls, which is not the case by the nations of the world. So that's to elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world, because only your behavior makes that determination, not their behavior. But ultimately, more is choser. You don't determine what I choose to do. Whatever I choose to do, that's based on what I will. Therefore, I'm not locked into any system. So therefore, that's the reason why this is not considered contradictory. We had the first base of Mikdash and second base of Mikdash. How many years did the first base of Mikdash stand? 410 years. Second base of Mikdash stood 420 years.
Kosish.
In last week's read, it says, Vosli Mishkan, Migdosh, V'shochanti B'socham. What is the word shochanti? Shochain Tes Tov Yud. Shochanti. In the first base of Migdosh, the Shechina was there. Second base of Migdosh, the Shechina wasn't there on an ongoing basis. The second base of Migdosh was deficient. So V'shochanti B'socha, Shochain Tov Yud. Shochanti. It's like conjunction. Shochain Tov Yud. How many years was the Shechina in our midst? 410 years. That's the Baal Torah in last week's reading. Here, Kosis Lamor, right? What Alan just mentioned. Kosis, the illumination. You're crushing the oil for illumination. That illumination, how many years did it exist in Eretz Yisrael? Chof Tov, Yud Tov. The second base of Mikdash was 420 years. The first base of Mikdash was 410 years. So the crushing of the oil to provide that ongoing light, that was over a period of what? 410 and 420. That's the Kosis Lamor. Let's take a look in Rashi. you take a look, if you have a Makaros Gedolos Chumash, Kosis, Remez, Tov Yud, Tov Chov Shonim. Hayanoig Hadlokas HaMenorah. Right? He says it alludes that 410 and 420 years, the menorah was kindled in the base of Mikdash. Now he says something interesting. La'alos. I said last week's parsha it said Ma'or, the vav was deleted. Here, when it says La'alos, to elevate the light of continuous light, La'alos, the vav is deleted. If you notice, why is it deleted? Chosev vav. Loma shevav ner is mechaben osam avol ner marav idolik lolom. There's a different concept. The Gemara tells us in Shabbos that the ner maravi. There's a question: which was the ner maravi? The western candle was the center. The light, which was from the shank of the menorah, right? You had the stems off the sides. That light never went out. That burned continuous, and all the other lights were lit from that. And after it was lit, they put that out and they rekindle it. So that's halos. What you have to light are only 6, because the other one, the 7, burnt continuously. So what's missing? The halos is what 6. You only have to kindle 6. The 7 didn't have to be kindled. Okay. So the more the vav deleted indicates, I don't need your light. And La'alos indicates the ongoing burning of the candle, which was an indication that Shechina exists in Klal Yisrael. You know, the Ness of Hanukkah, that was with the oil. What does the enough oil for one day burnt 8 days? What did that indicate? That the Shechina is with us. That's what it was all about. And that's La'alos. Okay. Let's see Rashi. Ato tetzaveh zoch lishmorim means without sediment. Shenina b'mnochas begagro brosh azayis. Only the first droplet of oil qualified for the oil of the menorah. Kosis hazeisim hoya kosesh b'machteshes. They would crush it with the machteshes, with a mortar and pestle. It was not ground in a grinder, and then they would somehow siphon oil, filter out the oil. After they would extract the first droplet of oil, and then you put the olive into a grinder. The first oil, only the first oil qualifies for the menorah, and the other oil was used for the meal offerings. It has to be crushed, extracted from or, but from menachos, for the meal offerings, the other one's qualified. I was just thinking, it says, only the first droplet of oil qualified for the menorah, right? Only the first. We find this concept at first. I'd mentioned many times the Rabbeinu Bachi in Parshas Kisavo. What would be Bikurim? What is the meaning of Bikurim? Bikurim and Bechor are the same word. It's the first. A Bechor is the firstborn, the first child to open the womb of its mother. That's Bechor. Bikurim are the first fruits and the first grains, which ripen. You bring that as a gift to Hashem. That's what it's called, Bikurim. So Rabbeinu Bachi writes over the introduction, Parshas Kisavo, which speaks about the Bikurim. He says, you take the first of the fruits and you bring it to the location, which is the chosen location, which is the Beis HaMikdash, for the sake of the first, who's Hashem, Atahu Rishon is the first, and you give it to the Kohen, who's the first, who's the chosen. So you take the Rishon to the location of the Rishon for the sake of the Rishon, which is God, and you give it to the Kohen, who's the Rishon. That's Rabbeinu Bachia. Now, If not for the Chet Egel, who was meant to be the Kohen? The Bechorim, right? The Bechor was meant to be the Kohen. It's only because of the Chet Egel, the Bechorim became disqualified. And the Levim who did not participate in the Chet Egel, so the elite of Levi was Aaron. Therefore, he and his children were chosen to be the Kohanim. So therefore, the Kohen is the equivalent of the Bechor, is the chosen. He's the Rishon. But the true Rishon is really the one who's naturally Rishon, which is the Bechor. He was meant to be the officiant of Hashem. Just as Hashem is the first in the reality, the Bechor is the first in the reality. He's the first to open the womb. So therefore, you take the first of the fruits, the first. Now, Truma. What is Truma? Truma is only qualified for the Kohen. Truma has innate Kedusha. A non-Kohen eats Truma, he's liable for Kores. What about Bikurim? Bikurim, the only person who's permitted Bikurim is only the Kohen. A non-Kohen, the Bikurim have the same status as Truma. It's the first. What about Challah? What's Challah called? When you tithe the dough, it's called Reishis Arisosechem. It's the first of your batter. The first of your batter has the same status as Truma. So Bikurim, Truma, and Challah all have the same status. The only one who's qualified to eat those particular tithings are only the Kohen. Why? Because since they reflect the characteristic of Hashem, which is Rishon, which is the first, only the one who has that same classification of Rishon, only he qualifies to be able to partake of that Rishon. For that reason. Okay? That's the way I understand it. Which droplet of oil qualified for the illumination of the menorah, for the kindling of menorah? Rashi brings Chazal, the first droplet that was extracted from that olive. Only that. Because when you kindle menorah, it has to be reshon. Now, what is Torah? Torah is what? Is Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. The foundation of the Torah is Reishis. Torah is Reishis. So to be able to activate the Siyata Deshmaya, to come upon the truth of Torah, which oil which is the illuminator, which droplet of oil qualifies to bring about that Siyata Deshmaya? Tipa Rishona. It's the first droplet. Again, Rishona. Because since this has to do with the ultimate, which is the Torah itself, which is the elucidation of the Torah, that's the only droplet of oil which qualifies for that. And it's kosis. It's crushed. And crushed is what? Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni. To have that relationship with Hashem at that special level, it was 410 and 420. The Gemara tells us in Tainis, based on the pasuk of Chukas, Zosa Torah Adam Kiyomas Bo'el. Eina Torah Niknis El B'Shem Menisatz Moleo. Torah can only be acquired a person who's willing to sacrifice, to forego amenities of life for the sake of Torah. That's Meimis Atzmoleo. What is Meimis? For what's foregoing those amenities? As it says in Pirkei Avos, Pas Melch Tochal, Mayim Surah Tishter, Al Oretz Tisha, Chai Tzar Tichya. You're willing to give up all the pleasures of life for the sake of Torah. What's that? That's kosis. Kosis, you're crushed. You will allowing yourself to be crushed for the sake of Torah. Only then a person who has that level of dedication to Torah study, he merits that special siyata d'shmaya. So again, that reflects the kosis of the oil. As the oil is extracted through being pummeled, and you extract that first droplet, and then you have the illumination identically, the Talmud Chacham was Meimisatz Boleo. He's willing to forego all the pleasures of life for the sake of Torah, which is equivalent of that, then he merits that siyata d'shmaya to be able to come upon the truth of Torah. Identical the same way. If Zosa Brocha says, Vein tuku l'raglecho, tuku. So Rashi over there cites the measures, and you take a look at Zosa Brocha, it's Raglev shel Talmid Chachomim They go and they leave their homes for the sake of study of Torah. And they actually wear down their feet for the sake of Torah. Also, the same concept of kosis. That's a tukul raglecha. They push themselves to be at your feet. Now, the whole concept of illness and disease, who should be the only ones should be victims of that? Only the Jewish people. Why? Because the physical world is given to the nations of the world. The spiritual is ours. They have no relevance, told them about the nations of the world. And if that's the case, the whole concept of sickness and illness is atonement, is kapara. We are the only ones who should really be subject to illness and sickness. So why are the nations of the world also no less susceptible to all the illnesses and diseases? So the Medrash says, because if only Jews would become sick and be susceptible to disease, you know what the world will say? The Jews are a diseased people. They're a cursed people. They're immune and we're not immune. You know, if the world sees the Jews in that context, it's a chil Hashem. That God's people are a diseased people. Therefore, Hashem spreads it. So the world only is susceptible to illness and disease, so there should not be a chil Hashem. That's the Medrash. Because the purpose of existence is purely for the sake of Torah. And the Torah says they have the Tochacha. So Tocha really should only have relevance to us. The non-Jews are not bound. But yet, they are also susceptible to what was susceptible. Exactly for this reason. Because it's Bereshis Bara Elokim. The Torah was, the world was created for the sake of Torah and the Jewish people, not for the nations of the world.
Rabbi, is the understanding
You know, normally when you light something, you light it, it says you keep the light there until the flame goes up. It's not you just put the fire there and you let it catch on and goes up by itself. You keep your hand there with the fire and then it's Olev Me'eleho. The flame goes up by itself. What's this concept? I asked the question last week. I mean, it's a question we've discussed in the past. When it says you should make the menorah, what does it say? It doesn't say taseh menorah. It's te'oseh. It should be made. So Rashi over there explains that Moshe had difficulty exactly how to make the menorah. So what does Hashem say? Take the block of gold, throw it into the fire, and the menorah came out. Miraculously, the menorah came out. So who made the menorah? Hashem made the menorah. It was made. It's not he made it. But he says to Moshe, take the gold, just throw it into the fire. I mean, if God is performing a miracle, that the menorah comes about through miracle, what does Moshe even have to throw the block of gold in the fire? Right? So we explained in the past that what does the menorah represent? Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's your Gatam Motzoso. You have to take initiative. That you come upon the truth, that only qualifies you. Once you've taken initiative, God gives you that gift. You have to take whatever is necessary to take, an initiative you have to take. So the throwing the gold into the fire, into the furnace, that is the initiative. That's the human initiative. Once you take that initiative, it's teoseh. God responds with that divine assistance, divine clarification, illumination. That's a result of your initiative. That's take the gold, throw it in the fire. Lahalos ner tamid. You keep the fire there, but the fire goes up by itself. Once you take that initiative, the rest happens by itself. But you have to take the proper initiative. There's a Gemara in Menachos where Shmuel had taught a Talmud, one of the students, Nesach Shkolim. You know, one time Torah Sheba'al Peh was committed to memory, and Shmuel had forgotten Tractate Shkolim. So he asked his Talmud to teach him, to reteach him what he had taught him. But so the basis for the knowledge of the student was what Shmuel taught him, except Shmuel forgot it. So the student says to Shmuel, I'll come to your home, I'll teach you in your home. So Shmuel says, no, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you that you should teach me when I'm coming to you. So he asked why. So it says because it's better that way. It's better that I should come to you rather than you should come to me. So Rashi says, why? Because Yogata Motzos Tamim. Because Shmuel going and take the initiative to go to a student rather than a student coming and delivering on a silver platter, that was taking initiative. That's Yigia. That means Shmuel has to lower himself to a student for the sake of Torah. That initiative is called Yogata Motzoso. As a result of that, the level of success, because he took that initiative, he'll succeed to a greater level, he'll merit a greater level of Siyata Dishmaya. That's the Gemara. It's the same idea. You take initiative. And I always say over from the name of, it's either Rav Chaim Brisko or Rav Chaim Voloshna. It doesn't say Yogato Hivanto. You've toiled, you will understand. Yogato Motzoso. When a person comes upon a treasure, did you create the treasure? You just uncovered the treasure. When we study Torah, it's a gift of Hashem, except you have to meet a prerequisite. It's called Yigia. You have to actually take that initiative. Once you take the initiative, God gives to you as a gift. That's Motzoso. You find it. Now you've come upon that find. That's what it's all about. I once said that we find that, how did the Egel come about? It says in the Midrash that there were a number of sorcerers who were Egyptians who came out from Egypt with us, and they took the gold that Aaron had gathered, threw it into the kiln, and what walked out of that kiln? A golden calf that was walking and eating grass. And they did this through sorcery. So they took the block of gold, all the gold, threw it into the fire. That's how it came about. Now, what is the counterforce to idolatry? Torah is the counterforce. So as you take the block of gold, throw in the fire, the Egel comes about. How do you bring about the Siyata Dishmaya of Torah? Moshe took the block of gold, threw it into the fire, and the menorah came out. So the counterforce, which counters idolatry, comes about exactly the same way as the idolatry comes about. You take initiative and you create that nether force. You take that initiative and you create the ultimate force, which is God's representation in this world. That's what it is. We find
Rabbi, do we say that menorah, that block is the treatment, the antidote?
Wait, that's what I want to point out. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu, it's late, just finish this off, that Moshe Rabbeinu hesitated, should he go out to greet Yisro? Yisro sent the message to Moshe, either you come out to greet me, if not me, your wife, if not your wife, your children. So the Medrash says that because Yisro was a priest of idolatry initially, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, we discussed this, had hesitated whether he should give that special acknowledgement to a person with this kind of past. Hashem says you must go out to acknowledge him. Why? Because if he forfeited and gave up idolatry and left all the glory to come into the desert to accept my Torah, he deserves that special attention, acknowledgement, that special honor. And it says you find in the Torah, idolatry mentioned memches tomim. Idolatry is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. You got it? And ger is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. The convert. That means he gave up the idolatry, which is mentioned 48 times, to become a ger, which is mentioned 48 times. Now we read in Pirkei Avos, to acquire Torah in the ultimate level, it says memches dvarim she'Torah niknas behem. The 48 ways, you have to meet 48 levels of criteria to be able to fully be engaged in Torah. Why 48? Because we find idolatry is mentioned 48 times. So the only way you're out to counter that negative force is 48 levels of Torah. So we see Torah is the ultimate counterforce to be able to negate idolatry. Okay, let's do it.